Frank Jackson was a bad man through and through. When he was young, he used to ride with the Sam Bass gang, robbing trains and committing murder. Even amongst other desperados, Jackson was not liked due to his bad temper and irritable disposition. When a posse caught up with the Bass gang, they killed Sam Bass, but Jackson got away with just a bullet lodged in his leg. He rode through New Mexico until he reached Arizona and promptly changed his name to William F. Downing. The now Downing settled in the tough cattle town of Wilcox, and he was quickly taken in by the crooked town constable Bert Alvord and his gang. Well, Alvord saw the potential in his new recruit and made him a deputy. Well, the gang worked both sides of the law, committing robberies and murdering with immunity. In 1900, the gang attempted a train robbery in Fairbank, Arizona. Little did they know that ex-Texas Ranger Jeff Milton was aboard that train, and he fought back, shooting one of the gang who dropped wounded. The rest fled, leaving him to die. The wounded gang member, Three-Fingered Jack Dunlap, was bleeding to death, and being angry at having been left behind, he told authorities the names of all the men who were in Alvord's gang and what they were up to just before he bled out and died. Now, most of the gang were then rounded up and sent to Tombstone Jail, including Downing. While the gang was in jail, one of the gang members, still free, busted in and shot a deputy in the foot. The gang escaped, except they left Downing there. Some say due to the intense dislike towards him by some of the other gang members. Well, Downing was sentenced to 10 years in the Yuma Territorial Prison. After 7 years, Downing was released, and in 1907 he returned to Wilcox, where he opened a saloon called the Free and Easy. Now, the town of Wilcox had changed while Downing had been inside, and now saloons were prohibited from having any gambling, prostitution, or the serving of alcohol to women. Downing, though, never one to abide by the laws, hired prostitutes anyway to service his clients. The girls were known to pick the pockets of the drunken men, but the victims rarely complained because they knew what they were doing was illegal and that the ex-con Downing himself was a very dangerous man. One day, Downing had beaten one of his girls named Cuco Leal and had gouged her eyes, so she complained at the office of the town constable, and a warrant was then issued for Downing's arrest. On the morning of August 5th of 1908, Arizona Ranger Billy Speed and Constable Bud Snow walked to the front of the Free and Easy saloon owned by Downing, and when they got there, they called him out. Downing, who was already drinking with friends and drunk, refused to come out. So the lawmen split up, and Ranger Speed went around the back to guard the back door. Constable Snow called on Downing again to come out, and this time Downing put down his glass, got up, and made his way to the back door to escape. He neglected to pick up his gun, though, and holster that he usually kept under the bar. As Downing opened the back door, he checked around, and finding the alley clear, he stepped out. He walked along to the corner of the building just as Ranger Speed arrived at the same time. Instinctively, Downing reached for his pistol that wasn't there, and that was all that was needed for Ranger Speed to raise his Winchester and shoot Downing. Well, Downing was dead before he hit the dirt. The bullet had hit him in the chest and tore through his lung before exiting under his shoulder. Downing had been making idle threats towards the Rangers for weeks, and their captain said in no uncertain terms to shoot first and ask questions later. Constable Snow, after hearing the gunfire, raced around the building to find Ranger Speed standing over the bloody body. Arizona Ranger Captain Wheeler remarked afterwards, "This is the first time that I've known a dead man to be without a single friend, and the first time that I've known a killing to meet absolute general rejoicing in all this town and precinct." The Arizona Range News reported, "I hear Billy Speed killed Bill Downing on Tuesday." What was the complaint? No complaint. Everybody was satisfied. The coroner determined that the killing was lawful, and Downing was buried unmourned in an unmarked grave in the Wilcox Cemetery.
After Robert Ford shot outlaw Jesse James in the back of the head in 1882 to collect a $5,000 reward, he became a minor celebrity across the country, and he also appeared in a stage show reenacting the cowardly execution. 10 years later, Ford opened a tent saloon in the rough but rich mining town of Creede, Colorado. On June 8, 1892, Ford was busy preparing the saloon for another busy day when a man named Edward O'Kelly walked into the closed tent with a shotgun. Ford was stacking shelves when O'Kelly called out, "Hello, Bob." As Ford turned around, O'Kelly gave him both barrels. Ford dropped to the ground with his neck almost severed. The reasons for the murder are hazy, but one suggestion was it was over. Ford accusing O'Kelly of theft. Another, that O'Kelly wanted to be famous for killing the man that killed Jesse James. Either way, O'Kelly was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 18 years in the Colorado penitentiary. Just 9 years later, he was released after a 7,000-signature petition was handed to the governor. After his release, O'Kelly quickly left Colorado and moved to Oklahoma City. His fame had preceded him, and he was recognized by a man who witnessed the murder of Ford. Soon, his reputation as a killer was widely known in the city. In December 1903, O'Kelly was arrested by police for larceny and let go after 2 days' imprisonment. On his return to his hotel, he made threats to kill the policeman to anyone who would listen. In January, he was arrested again and released, telling people they had better not try and arrest him again. That evening, policeman Joseph Grant Burnett was walking his beat-down First Street when he encountered O'Kelly. The policeman gave O'Kelly a friendly nod and kept walking. Suddenly, O'Kelly smashed Burnett in the face with his fist and stepped back, drawing a gun from his pants. The policeman grabbed the gun also, and the pair wrestled. O'Kelly managed to shoot the gun 3 times, the bullets passing through the policeman's clothing. Now out of ammunition, O'Kelly bit both of Officer Burnett's ears clean through. The policeman was screaming help. But the only one who came was one of O'Kelly's friends, and he took a pot shot at the officer before running away. Finally, a bystander came to help the policeman and grabbed O'Kelly's hand. As he did so, Burnett reached for his gun in his holster and pulled it out and shot O'Kelly in the temple, and again as he fell to the ground, dead. Burnett was now the man that killed the man who killed the man who killed Jesse James. Burnett continued with the Oklahoma City Police Department. He served as captain and later as assistant chief of police. He died in 1917 of paralysis after a stroke at St. Anthony's Hospital. Burnett was buried in a marked grave in the same cemetery as the man he killed. Valdosta experienced a sensation Saturday night such as no other city in the country has ever witnessed. It was a chase by scores of people after a monster 5-ton elephant, which had trampled its keeper to death and was standing in defiance of all who should come within reach. After a chase lasting all night long and far into Sunday morning, the big brute was killed by Chief of Police Dampier, 6 miles above the city, with a single shot from a Krag Jorgensen rifle. The animal had been shot dozens of times in the past, and this is said to have been the first animal of the kind ever killed with a rifle ball in this country. The elephant belonged to the Harris Nickel Plate shows, which gave 2 performances here Saturday and which broke tents that night to go into winter quarters at Pine Park. The animal was named Gypsy, and she had been seen many times in this city. She was one of the largest elephants in the world. The show was here for 2 weeks during the state fair and gave 2 performances daily, the acts by Gypsy being features of the performances. The show went from here to Lake City for 2 performances, and then visited Macon, Cordele, Tifton, and other places along the Georgia Southern Road, returning here Saturday morning for the last 2 performances of the season. The big beast was in charge of James O'Rourke, who seemed to have her under perfect control. She was an exceedingly intelligent, and her acts in the circus ring were the cleverest ever witnessed here. Among them was the blowing of a harmonica. Gypsy being the only elephant in the world which had been trained to blow a wind instrument of any kind. All day Saturday, O'Rourke, the elephant's trainer, complained of being sick, and that afternoon he began to take quinine and whiskey in pretty liberal doses. He was seen to take a drink of whiskey just before mounting the elephant to go to the park, and one of the showmen spoke to him and suggested that he had better cut that out. At O'Rourke's command, the elephant kneeled down and he crawled up on her head, and then he gave the signal for her to move on. The great beast started off from the showgrounds east of the City Hall toward Patterson Street and thence to the Georgia Southern Passenger Depot, where O'Rourke expected to get a change of clothing to put on. He remained at the circus cars a short while and started back uptown along Patterson Street, turning at Hill Avenue toward the showgrounds, but turning again at Ashley Street toward Central Avenue. The showmen say that the elephant expected to go in the car at the depot, and when she was brought back uptown, it angered her. The turn at Ashley Street was made, and Gypsy ambled along toward Central Avenue, where a turn was made to the left, leading toward Patterson Street, but crossing that street and continuing the slow pace toward Toombs Street. A number of parties on the street called out to O'Rourke and told him that he was going the wrong way, but he paid no attention to them. Chief Dampier was sitting at his stable when the elephant passed there, and he called O'Rourke's attention to the fact he was on the wrong street. But a mumbled answer came from the man on the elephant's head, and the chief supposed that he wanted to go a side street to get out of the way of the vehicles and streetcars on Patterson Street. 2 young men, Smith and Christian, followed the elephant from Patterson Street to Toombs and were close to her when O'Rourke fell off of her head. They stated that the elephant stopped a moment as if to wait for him to resume his position, but a moment later she kneeled down over him and crushed every bone in his body, rolling the limp body along with her trunk and tusks for probably 50 yards. She then turned toward the side of the street and began grazing on the grass there as if nothing had happened. Chief Dampier heard her crushing O'Rourke and ran over close enough to see that he could do nothing for the man. He then went to the circus and informed the managers of what had taken place. In a short while, the entire circus force was on the ground trying to control the animal, while Manager Wilson and Sheriff Passmore were trying to get the crowds to stand back. One of the clowns, Barney Shea, who was formerly her keeper, undertook to lead her toward the depot and place her on the cars there, and it was believed that he would succeed, as the animal knew his voice and followed him nearly to the plant system depot. In the meantime, a large crowd had gathered and excitement was running high. A train was stopped on the crossing where the elephant was to pass, and this, together with the excited crowds, seemed to rattle her. She turned back toward the Christian church, from which some of the members of the circus were calling to her in elephant talk. But it was apparent that she was getting thoroughly aroused. She grabbed an electric light pole with her trunk and shook it until the lights flew out all along the street. Then she began to hurl bricks and pieces of timber through the air. Billy Mincer, another of the clowns in the circus, was hemmed in a rear door of the new Christian church, but was pulled out and hurled some distance of the angry animal. She started to renew her attack upon him, but he was pulled out of the way by some parties who were nearby. He was in an unconscious condition and was carried to the Valdez Hotel for medical. In the meantime, Barney Shea and Clem Kerr, the latter being the advance agent of the circus, were in the new Christian church calling to Gypsy and trying to get her under control. Shea fired at her with a pistol several times, but the bullets did no harm except to make her mad. For a couple of hours, the elephant was master of the situation in that section of the city. She seemed to pay very little attention to home folks, but a number of times indicated a very keen desire to get hold of some of the circus crowd. They seemed to fear her more than anyone else, probably because they knew her better and they were careful to keep out of her way. Especially is this true of Barney Shea, her former manager, who stated that she had old grudges against him that she would never forget. After an hour or two spent in promenading up and down the sidewalk in front of the Valdez Hotel and the new Christian church, Gypsy turned up Toombs Street in a full gallop, and as far as the eye could reach under the swinging electric lights, her huge form swayed along with the alertness of a rabbit. Her steps, by actual measurement, were 8 or 9 feet each. She followed Toombs Street to the vacant lot beyond the residence Mr. B.H. Jones when she cut across to Patterson Street and went on to the park. Then Chief Dampier and a large posse followed her to the park for the purpose of killing her, as she had proven herself entirely unmanageable, and her owner, Mrs. Harris, had stated that she could not rest until she was sure the brute was dead. Her former keeper, Shea, got in the stand over the State Fair office and called her to him. She was in the rear end of the fair grounds, but she answered his call. Chief Dampier and his posse were on top of the ticket office. The big beast walked up within 50 yards of them and stopped. The moon was behind the clouds, and only a dim outline of her could be gotten. The chief drew his Krag Jorgensen rifle and fired at her 2 or 3 times. The wounds were evidently painful, but not fatal to her. She gave one shriek and started on a full run toward the fence in the rear of the grounds. She found a plank off and, with her huge trunk, brushed away a panel or two of the fencing like it was a row of toothpicks. She took the crossroad toward the Cat Creek Road and turned up that to Cherry Creek. It was then nearly 4 o'clock Sunday morning. Chief Dampier and his posse followed her for some distance and then returned to the city to get lunches, secure horses, and wait for light to dawn upon the scene. By daylight, the chief and his crowd were ready to go on the hunt again. His posse consisted of his first lieutenant, Mr. M.A. Briggs and James Gates, D.A. Sinclair, Lawrence Walker, Roy Hightower, Dave Roberts, and 1 or 2 other parties. Mr. Briggs and Chief Dampier were in a buggy, while the other parties were on horseback. They left the city about 5 o'clock and followed the big animal out, toward Cherry Creek on the Nashville Road. At several places they saw where the elephant had stopped in the road and had stood there some time, the impression on the ground looking as if she had lain down. The first sight of the big mountain of flesh and blood was near Cherry Creek, and all came to a halt. The elephant, blind in one eye, was standing across the road with his good eye turned toward the city, evidently watching in that direction. Her big body was swaying to and fro after the manner that elephants sway themselves when standing still. When she caught a view of the crowd, she turned toward the north and started off in a rapid walk. The parties lighted and started in pursuit through the woods. The elephant finally came to a stop, and Chief Dampier ran around to her side, taking a position probably 75 yards from her. The excitement of the chase, together with its fatigue, had made him nervous, and he was afraid to try and fire at her without taking good aim. The chief got a good rest for his weapon on a fence and took deliberate aim at her head. The Krag Jorgensen rifle cracked with a sharp ping, and the big brute fell to her knees and then over on her side. One shot had done the perfect work of destroying her life, and when the parties reached her, she was nothing more than a huge bulk of inanimate flesh. Chief Dampier fired one more shot into her head, and other members of the party fired 2 or 3 times from their Winchesters and pistols. An examination of the death wound showed that the bullet entered her temple and went probably 3 feet deep in her head. Another shot from the Krag Jorgensen rifle had gone entirely through her neck. The Winchester shots had only entered an inch or two and had probably done no more than tickle her. Chief Dampier and posse returned to the city and reported the death of the elephant, and the announcement came as a great relief to the circus people. They had been uneasy all night long and were really glad to know that the great brute had been killed. even though it was a big financial loss to them. All day Sunday, large crowds went out on the scene of the killing, and scarcely anything else was talked about on the streets. The tragedy of the night before and the excitement incident to the chase after the big animal made it the most sensational event that Valdosta has ever known. The body of the elephant was buried a short distance from where she fell dead Sunday morning. A half-dozen horses were used to drag the remains to the grave, but they were unequal to the task, and the body was finally cut to pieces with axes and moved apart at a time, 4 horses being used for the task. The dead elephant proved to be a drawing card for hundreds of people from this city, as well as the surrounding country. It is estimated that fully 3,000 people visited the place where she was killed to get a view of her huge carcass, many of these walking 6 or 7 miles to see the sight. Mr. T.G. Powers, of the Harris shows, one of the animal trainers, was formerly in charge of Gypsy and knows her history as well as any other living man. He stated to a Times reporter yesterday that the animal was about 65 years of age and that she was among the first elephants ever brought to this country. She was imported by the O'Brien Circus, which traveled through the country in wagons in 1847. She has been owned by nearly all of the big shows in the country, each one of them disposing of her on account of her temper, though at fabulous prices owing to her wonderful intelligence.